We are live. I know you have not heard me. Hey, all praise be to the Most High, the Holy One. I pray everybody is well. Let me just start off right there. I pray everybody is well. As you can hear my voice, it means I've been using it a lot. And you haven't heard me in this capacity. We looked since May the 24th. Our second edition of Henry Box Brown was May. And right now we are the last day in June. Henry has been in this box since May. That's a problem. And my daughter and the children keep saying, Mommy, Henry's been in the box. What's going on? And right in the midst of, and that happened in another narrative. I think it was Charles Ball's narrative. No, it wasn't. It was actually, oh gosh, wow, we've read so many narratives. It was actually Lewis Hughes' narrative. The same thing kind of happened. The underground came in at that point, but in this narrative, Henry's narrative, roots. I mean, I guess there's a lot of historical movies around the topic of slavery that kind of jumped over here and jumped over there. So we're back at the very core of what we started in the beginning, which is the Left Project and the love of the reading of the narrative. So we really never stopped. We just took some time to analyze the now and how what we're reading relates. And let me just say, for those who have been along, who've grown along with the Left Project, a big thank you. If you haven't seen the video, I created some t-shirts that we can raise awareness. So go ahead and check it out. If you're interested in the t-shirts, I'll go ahead and put the link in the box. Lift your voice. I believe one says speak up, says the other, the hashtag Left Project. So definitely continue to share and learn and grow. So I was going to do this later, but then now something popped up for later. And so I said, let me get at this Left Project now, right now. So Henry has been in the box. This is part 3. We left off on chapter 6. And when I realized it was kind of long, I decided to put it off. I didn't know at that point it was going to be a month and 6 days later. So without further ado, this is Henry Box Brown, one of the very famous stories on the Underground Railroad. He was shipped to freedom. He shipped himself, as a matter of fact, with the help of abolitionists and others who were involved. And this is what we're going to read about. We saw something that was alluded to this in the Underground series, which is a series about the Underground Railroad and how it really worked. And so if you knew about this character, Henry Box Brown, not character, actually a real man, then you would know that they were alluding to his story. So let's continue. Chapter 6. If you don't know what in the world I am talking about, please listen to the first 2, as a matter of fact, editions before you get to this one. All right. I now begin to think of entering the matrimonial state. And with that view, I had formed an acquaintance with a young woman named Nancy, who was a slave belonging to Mr. Lay, a clerk in the bank. And like many more slaveholders professing to be a very pious man, we had made it up to get married, but it was necessary in the first place to obtain our master's permission, as we could do nothing without their consent. Since we're so behind, I'm going to try to leave my commentary to a minimum here. Fight back the feeling to say something. All right. So you couldn't do anything without the master's consent. I therefore went to Mr. Lay and made known to him my wishes, when he told me he never meant to sell Nancy, and if my master would agree never to sell me, I might marry her. He promised faithfully that he would not sell her, and pretended to entertain an extreme horror of separating families. You notice what I liked about, okay, I gotta say this, I'm sorry. What I liked about Henry's narrative, he's so, he's very, what's the word I'm looking for here? He illustrates his point so artistically. And he puts these words in there to let you know his intention. And in this one, he says, the master's pretending that, oh, he's so pious, because this was also something, I told her I wasn't going to do it, and I'm doing it. Okay, I'm going to stop this out. But one more thing, you know, the masters were, there was a breed of masters who felt, like he said, that they were pious and they were good masters, and they would do things to try to project this narrative that they wanted people to believe. And so he's trying to say, he's not like those, you know, low down masters who separate families. He gave me a note to my master, and after they had discussed the matter over, I was allowed to marry the object of my choice. And why did he call her an object? When she became my wife, she was living with Mr. Reeves, a minister of gospel. I was allowed to marry, okay, he said that, sorry, a minister of gospel who had long come from the north, where he had the character of being an anti-slavery man. But he had not been long in the South when all his anti-slavery notions vanished, and he became a staunch advocate of slave-holding doctrines, and even wrote articles in favor of slavery, which were published in the Richmond Republican. For all of our researchers out there, he just gave us something that we can go substantiate. The Richmond Republican, the name of the author would be Mr. Reeves, a minister of the gospel. So it'd be interesting to, as we go through these narratives, to read what people wrote in those times, not only the slaves, the slave masters, and also the general public. My wife was still the property of Mr. Lay, and from the apparent sincerity of his promises to us, we felt confident that he would not separate us. Of course, the phone is ringing as I'm reading.
Call from Lalu. Hello, please leave a message after.
Wait a minute, 1 second. 1 second.
Bye-bye calling. Bye-bye.
I gotta give him a call back. That's my Baba calling. That's everybody. I gotta give him a call back. 1 second. My wife was still the property of Mr. Lay, and for the apparent sincerity of his promises to us, we felt confident, okay, that he would not separate us. And remember what we read in other spaces, that the slave master's promise is not worth anything. We had not, however, been married about 12 months when his conscientious scruples vanished, and he sold my wife to Mr. Joseph H. Colquitt, a saddler living in the city of Richmond and a member of Dr. Plummer's church there. This Mr. Colquitt was an exceedingly cruel man, and he had a wife who was, if possible, still more cruel. She was very contrary and hard to be pleased. She used to abuse my wife very much, not because she did not do her duty, but because it was said her manners were too refined for a slave. You see, again, the slave master's word was no good. And so this man said, hey, I'm not going to sell you or your wife. Not even a year later, he does exactly what he said he wouldn't do. Remember who and what we are dealing with. It is important on all sides. At this time, my wife had a child in his name, and this vexed Mrs. Colquitt very much. She could not bear to see her nursing her baby, and used to wish some great calamity to happen to my wife. Eventually, she was so much displeased with my wife that she induced Mr. Colquitt to sell her to one Philip M. Tabb, Jr., for the sum of $450. But coming to see the value of her more clearly after she tried to do without her, she could not rest till she got Mr. Colquitt to repurchase her from Mr. Tabb, which he did about 4 months after he had sold her for $500, being $50 more than he had sold her for. So they would want to convince you that you have no value. You would want to be convinced. I said I wasn't going to do it. It's like I almost can't stop myself. I'm going to try to stop myself. But they almost try to convince you that you have no value, but at the same time, you couldn't live without the value of your servant. And so you actually bought them back for more than you sold them for. And the second thing I see in this conversation, in the same way that he called the property of her master, correct? Oh, okay, Angel, that's what's up. Angel says she appreciates the commentary, because I'll be trying to hold myself back from this commentary, but it's like, it just screams out of me. I'm sorry. But definitely he and she was an object. They objectified her. And that distance for me made it a little bit safe, but not. Because he had, as we are seeing here, no control really over his family. And the second thing, this Colquitt lady, right? And we see this oftentimes amongst, quote, Black people and their children, this forced separation. They would have you to believe you don't really care about your child. But in this institution, if you had too many tender feelings, if you cared too much about your child, if you put your children before your duty to them, we see in this case of Miss Colquitt here, that is cause for contention. that is cause for hatred, and that was cause for her to be sold. So all of these things have trickled down into the way in which a lot of quote unquote black people look at their children, look at their offsprings. Some, most, not most, a good amount as burdens and not blessings. A good amount to be spoken about, because there are many people who love their children, and it goes beyond black and white. But in this situation, the servitude caused it to be more of an issue. But I'm gonna continue. Shortly after this, Miss Colquitt was taken sick, and his minister, Mr. Colquitt was taken sick, and his minister, the Reverend Dr. Plummer, was sent for to visit him. The doctor came and prayed for him, and so did other, I'm gonna keep reading, members of the church. But he did not get any better, so that they all thought he must soon die. The doctors had given up all hopes of him, and his wife and children and friends stood round his bedside in tears, expecting every minute he would breathe his last. All the servants were in readiness lest they should be called to go to some message. I had just then got home from laboring for my master. My wife was waiting for me, but she said she expected every minute that some person would be calling to tell her that master was gone. When, to my surprise, Joseph Colquitt sent to my wife to tell him to come and to speak with him. I immediately left my room and went to his bedside, and as soon as he saw me, he caught hold of my hand and said, "Henry, somebody help me. I don't know. I need to drink a water before I read this. 1 second. I'm sorry. Let me. Oh, man. Hold on, everybody. Don't mind me. After watching Roots and watching it. Wait. Somebody help me. I don't know. I need to drink a water before I read this. Let me put this on pause here. Let me make sure I can see everybody on if you're making comments. Okay, Muna, breathe. He calls for Henry, right? And says, "Henry, will you pray for me and ask the Lord to spare my life and restore me to health?" So imagine the master who was oppressed, sold your wife, broken your family, people who are participating in lies and deception, coming to say, pray for your enemies. And this is where a lot of our people, we saw this in the church bombing, the church shooting. They had the same very conversation after the boy came and shot up the church recently. And she says, "I pray for him." Okay, this is where okay, we'll continue. "I felt it my duty to do the best I could in asking the Lord to have mercy upon him, because although he was a slaveholder and a very cruel man, and had used my wife very badly, yet I had no right to judge between him and his God." And notice he says him and his God. "So I knelt down by his bedside and prayed for him." After, you want to know why? Because the master understands that he was cruel. And now that you're going to meet your maker, you want some kind of reprieve. You want some kind of, for him to absorb you some kind of way. Interesting. After I got up, he caught hold of my arm again and said, "One more favor I have to ask of you. Go and tell all my slaves that belong to the church to come and pray for me." Why is he looking for this? Okay, that's no. "I went according to his request, and we prayed 3 nights with him after our work was done. And although we needed rest ourselves, yet at the earnest desire of the apparently dying man, we were induced to forego our rest and to spend our time in comforting him. At the end of this time, he began to get a little better. And in a few weeks, he was able to sit at a table and to take his meals with the family." Are you listening to this? "I happened to be at his house one day at our breakfast hour after he got quite well, and his wife appeared as if she wished to joke her husband about the colored people praying for him when he was sick. Mrs. Culprit had been expelled from the Baptist church, and since that time she has disliked religion. She pretended that she did not believe either in God or devil, and went on at such a rate, plaguing Mr. Colquitt about the Negroes praying for him, that he grew angry at last and exclaimed with an oath that it was all lies about the Negroes praying for him. He denied asking any person to pray for him. And he said if he did ask the Negroes to pray for him, he must have been out of his senses and did not at the time he spoke. remembering anything about it. But his wife still persisted in what she said. He went to the back door and called his slaves one at a time, asking them who it was that prayed for him, until he got the names of all those who had been concerned in the affair. And when he had done so, he whipped every one of them, which said he had prayed as Miss Colquitt has stated. You know, Henry, oh boy. He seemed wishful to whip me also, but as I did not belong to him, he was deprived of the prayer. Or sorry, he was deprived as he prayed, as Miss Colquitt had stated. He seemed, sorry, I'm so, right now, I just read the same thing twice. He seemed wishful to whip me also, but as I did not belong to him, he was deprived of the pleasure of praying or paying for my services in the manner in which others had been rewarded. Mr. Colquitt, however, determined that I should suffer too. And for that purpose, he proceeded to sell my wife to one Samuel Cottrell, who wished to purchase her. I'm sorry, because there's a part in the Apocrypha that gives a very interesting, no, it says, when you would do good, know unto whom you do good unto, you know. And we as a people, we saw this, like I said, you can look at the shooting in the church, I think it was South Carolina, and see this very behavior. This behavior, again, I'll keep saying it, this domestic violence type, because this is domestic violence on a larger scale. Racism, white supremacy, as it related to slavery. And we see that because of the position that the abused and the oppressed was in, they were compelled to do something to sympathize with your abuser, to rationalize your reality, forego your needs like sleep, to come and pray for this man. Because when he was in, he made you, he invokes some kind of sympathy within you, right? And when you did it, because someone else that is, quote, on his level in jest is making him to feel less than, for your kindness, he repays you with a whipping. Please, please, please take note of this history. Please take note of this history. Let me continue. It says here, so he whips everybody, can't whip Samuel, so he sells his wife. Mr. Colquitt, however, determined that I should suffer too. Okay, he sells the wife. This man came to me one day and told me that Mr. Colquitt was going to sell my wife and stated that he wanted a woman to wait upon his wife, and he thought my wife would precisely suit her, but he said her master asked $650 for her and her children, and he only $600 that he would conveniently spare if he would let him have $50 to make up the price. He would prevent her from being sold away from me. I was, however, a little suspicious about being fooled out of my money, and I asked him if I did advance the money, what security I could have that he would not sell my wife as the others had done. But he said to me, do you think if you allow me to have that money that I could have the heart to sell your wife to any other person but yourself, and particularly knowing that your wife is my sister and you my brother in the Lord? Here we go with the conversation now. While all of us are members of the church, again, the lies that have been told. Let me continue. Oh no, I never could have the heart to do such a deed as that. After he had shown off his religion in this manner and lavished it upon me, I thought it would let him have the money. Not that I had implicit faith in his promise, but that I knew he could purchase her if he wished, whether I were to assist him or not. And I thought by thus bringing him under an obligation to me, it might at least be somewhat to the advantage of my wife to be and to me. So I gave him the $50 and went off and bought my wife and children. And he went off and bought my wife and children. Can you imagine somebody saying they went off and bought your wife and your children? And there's not, and someone else owns you, so there's nothing that you can do about that. And that very same day he came to me and told me that my wife and children were not now his property. And that's the husband you're speaking. This is why they speak about the institution of marriage among slaves really not existing in slavery, and how we have a distorted view of what it means to be in this union, because a lot of there was no respect for this union, as you can very well see. So this new owner could have well taken his wife and children and given to someone else. And we still have the remnants of this kind of behavior today. And he says, and at that very same day, he came to me and told me that my wife and children were now his property, and that I must hire a house for them, and he would allow them to live there if I would furnish them with everything they wanted and pay him $50 a year. So again, he says, I must hire a house for them, and he would allow them to live there if I would furnish them with everything they wanted and pay him $50 a year. If you don't do this, he said, I will sell her as soon as I get a buyer for her. Okay, this is, maybe I'm a little bit turned up because it's been a while since is anybody else, or is it just me right now? Am I a bit turned up because it's been a while since I've read? Or, okay, the guy just like told a bold-faced lie about the church, and now as soon as you don't do what I want, then I'm going to sell her and your children. Please take note, pencil and paper. He says, I will sell her as soon as I get a buyer for her. I was struck with astonishment, of course. Anybody would be like, huh? Are you like a multiple personality type of individual? He says, I was struck with astonishment to think that this man in one day could exhibit himself in two such different characters. Listen, I promise you guys, I didn't read this before. So the thoughts that I'm having, I didn't even read. When I said multiple personality, that's what came to my mind. I think we must be kindred spirits, me and Henry here, because he thinks he thinks how I would write. He says, in one day could exhibit himself in two such different characters. This dude has multiple personalities. A few hours ago, filled with expressions of love and kindness, and now a monster tyrant, making light of the most social ties and imposing such terms as he chose to those whom but a little before he begged to conform to his will. Now, being a slave, I had no power to hire a house, and what this might have resulted in, I do not know. If I had not met with a friend in the time of need, in the person of James C.A. Smith, Jr. He was a free man, and I went to him and told him my tale and asked him to go and hire a house for me to put my wife and children into, which he immediately did. He hired one at $72 per annum and stood master of it for me. And notwithstanding the fearful liabilities under which I lie, I now began to feel a little easier, and might perhaps have managed to live in a kind of a way if we had been let alone here. But Mr. S. Cottrell had not yet done with robbing us. He now sooner saw that we were thus comfortably situated. Then he said my wife must do some of his washing. I'm going to keep trying to read here. I still had to pay the house hire and the hire of my wife, to find her and the children with everything they required. Keep in mind, he's still a slave. And now this man who said he would leave them alone if he paid $50 now wants the wife to work plus him paying the $50. And she had to do his wash tub beside, or washing. Still, we felt ourselves more comfortable than we had ever been before. So more situations, more requirements, but because as long as I'm not a slave, he's saying, guess what? This is better than slavery. So, this is what we see with the taxes and the levying and all of the red tape, that it's keep on piling and piling upon. He said, in this way, we went out for some time. I paid him the hire of my wife regularly whenever he called for it, whenever it was due or not. So this dude he's basically, strong arming him at this point. But he seems still bent on robbing me. Paid him the hire of more thoroughly than he had the previous day. For one pleasant morning in the month of August, 1848, when my wife and more thoroughly than he had the previous day. My eyes is playing tricks on me. Sorry. In the month of August 1848, when my wife and children and myself were sitting at table about to eat our breakfast, Mr. Cottrell called and said he wanted some money today, as he had a demand for a large amount. I said to him, "You know I have no money to spare, because it takes nearly all that I make for myself to pay my wife's hire. He rent out of my house, the rent out of my house, my own ties to my master, and to keep ourselves in meat and clothes. And if at any time I have made anything more than that, I have paid it to you in advance. And what more can I do?" Mr. Cottrell, however, said, "I want money, and money I will have." I could make him no answer. He then went away, and I then said to my wife, "I wonder what Mr. Cottrell means by saying, 'I want money, and money I will have.'" My poor wife burst into tears and said perhaps he will sell one of our children, and our hearts were so full that neither of us could eat any breakfast. And after mutually embracing each other as it meant it might be our last meeting, and fondly pressing our little darlings to our bosoms, I left the house and went off to my daily labor, followed by my little children, who called after me to come back soon. I felt that life had joys worth living, for I could only be allowed to enjoy them. For if I could only be allowed to enjoy them. Let me make this thing bigger, because I'm not reading from a book, I'm reading from the internet. There we go. And I'm missing some words, so yeah, turn it up, sis. Yes, indeed. I made it bigger so I would stop missing here my words here. So it was kind of small. So hopefully that will help in my missing a step. Where are we? He says, "But my heart was filled with deep anguish from the awful calamity which I was thus obliged to contemplate as not only a possible, but a high probable occurrence. I now went away to my work, and I could, as I went, see many other slaves hastening in the same direction. I began to consider their lot and mine, and although my heart was filled with sorrow, I felt still disposed to look upon the bright side of the future. I could still see some alleviation to my cause of sorrow. It was true that the greater portion of my earnings were stolen from me by the unscrupulous hand of my master, that I was entirely at his mercy, and might at any moment be snatched from those enjoyments as well as those I thought were open to me, that if he chose, he might still further gratify his robbing propensities and demand a larger portion of my earnings, so that the pleasures of intellect would be completely closed to my mind, but I could enjoy myself with my family about me while I listened to the pleasing prattle of my children and experienced the kindness of a wife, which were privileges that every slave could not enjoy. I had not been many hours at work when I was informed that my wife and children were taken from their home and sent to the auction mart and sold, and then lay in prison ready to start away the next day for North Carolina with the man who had purchased them. I cannot express in language what were my feelings of this occasion. My master treated me kindly, but he still retained me in a state of slavery. His kindness, however, did not keep me from feeling the smart of this awful deprivation. I had left my wife and children at home in the morning, as well situated as slaves could be. I was not anticipating their loss, not on account of the feigned piety of their owner, for I had long ago learned to look through such hollow pretenses in those who held slaves, but because of the obligation to me for money, I had advanced to him on the express condition that he should not sell her to any person but myself. Such, however, was the case, and as soon as I could get away, I went and purchased some things to take to the jail to them I so much beloved, or so much loved. and to have one farewell embrace before parting forever. He says, I had not proceeded far, however, when I met with a gentleman who perceived my anguish of heart, as depicted in my countenance, inquired what was the matter with me. I had no sooner hinted at my circumstances, however, than he knew all about it, having heard it before. He advised me not to go to the jail, for, said he, the man that bought your wife and family has told your master some falsehoods and has ordered the jailer to seize you and put you in prison if you should make your appearance there, when you would most likely be sold separately from them, because the Methodist he's minister, all right. The Methodist minister that bought your wife does not want any men. Does this sound familiar? Like the system, when they were giving aid, the government giving aid to mothers with children on welfare, they didn't want any men. They wanted the control of the women. So you had this space where, and I have to do more research on it, but that which I can remember, where men were no longer allowed in the household as head of household to be qualified for these supplementations from the government. So that sounds familiar. That sounded familiar for minister. That sounded familiar. Sorry. So being thus advised, I thought it better not to go to the jail myself, but I secured a friend to go in my stead and take some money and the things which I had purchased for my wife, and tell her that it was that I could not come myself. And it turned out in the end to be much better that I did not go. For as soon as the young man arrived at the jail, he was seized and put in prison, the jailer mistaking him for me. So not only did this man, this master, lie to him about not selling, not only did he violate his agreement, he then lies again to get this man apprehended so as not to see his family one last time. Okay, so the friend or the person he sends gets put in jail. The jailer mistaking him for me, but when he discovered his mistake, he was very angry and vented his rage upon the innocent youth by kicking him out of the prison. He discovered his mistake by asking my wife if that were not her husband, and she said he was not. But he was not satisfied with her answer, for he asked the children also if he were not their father, and as they too said he was not, convinced, and then proceeded to abuse the young man in the manner before mentioned. Boy, Henry, you are not disappointing in this story right about now. You are not disappointing. After I heard of these things, I went to my Christian master and informed him now I was served. But he shoved me away from him as if I were not human. I could not rest with him with this, however. I went to him a second time and implored him to be kind enough to buy my wife and to save me from so much trouble of mine. Still, he was inexorable, and only answered me by telling me to go to my work and not to bother him anymore. Sorry, I need to drink some water. I went to him a third time, which would be about 10 o'clock, and told him how Catriel had robbed me, as the scoundrel was not satisfied with selling my wife and children, but he had no sooner got them back out of the town than he took everything which he could find in my house and carried it off to be sold. The things which he then took had cost me nearly $300. I begged master to write Catriel and make him give me up my things, but his answer was, Mr. Catriel is a gentleman, and I am afraid to meddle with his business. So having satisfied myself that my master would do nothing for me, I left him and went to two young gentlemen with whom I was acquainted to try if I could induce them to buy my wife. But when I had stated my case to them, they gave me to understand that they did not deal in slaves, so they could not do that. But they expressed their willingness to do anything else that I might desire of them. Go put that down. So finding myself unsuccessful here, I went sorrowfully back to my own deserted home and found that what I heard was quite true. Not only had my wife and children been taken away, but every article of furniture has also been removed to the auction mart to be sold. Just wait. I had made inquiry as to where my things had been put, and having found this out, went to the sheriff's office and informed him that the things Mr. Cottrell had bought to being sold did not belong to him, but they were mine, and I hoped that he would return them. I was then told by the sheriff that Mr. Cottrell had left the things to be sold in order to pay himself a debt of $17.21, which he said if I would pay, he would let me take away the things. So this, now the sheriff became the pawn shop. So this is stolen goods that he used to pay a debt. And now the sheriff, you're looking for justice again in this time. And the sheriff is telling him, this is a pawn shop, so you go ahead and redeem this stuff by paying me, even though someone stole your stuff. I then went to my good friend, Dr. Smith, who was always ready and willing to do what he could for me. And having got the money, I paid it to the sheriff. So this is all extortion, and took away the things which I was obliged to do that night, as far as I was able. And what was left, I removed in the morning. When I was taking home the last of my things, I met Mr. Cottrell and two of his Christian brethren in the street. He stopped me and said he had heard I had been to the sheriff's office and got away my things. Yes, I said, I have been and got away my things, but I could not get away my wife and children, whom you have put beyond my power to redeem. He then began to give me a round of abuse, while his two Christian friends stood by and heard him, but they did not seem to be the least offended at the terrible barbarity which was there placed before them. I now left Mr. Cottrell and his friends, and going home endeavored to court a little less rest by laying down in a position so as to induce sleep. I had borne too heavy a load of grief on my mind to admit of me even closing my eyes for an hour during the whole night. Many schemes for effecting the redemption of my family passed through my mind, but when the morning sun arose, I found myself on my way towards my master's house to make another attempt to induce him to purchase my wife. And he spoke, let me continue, man. Let me check and see how everybody's doing. Hope everybody's doing well. If you just joined this, I'm like, I guess it's been away. I've been away for a while, so I'm like really turned up right now. And we're reading Henry Box Brown. We started it last month, the end of last month. And so we're trying to finish it up, but I think we might have to break this in two, because we still have, we're gonna go to chapter 7. So I'm almost to chapter 7, and then we'll come back and read more. And it won't be a month before we finish this, definitely. So let's see. He meets Mr. Cottrell, and he says, many schemes for effecting the redemption of my family passed through my mind, but when the morning sun arose, I found myself on my way towards my master's house to make another attempt to induce him to purchase my wife. But although I besought him with tears in my eyes, I did not succeed in making the least impression on his obdurate heart. Obdurate. I gotta check this word out. I know it's probably mean hardening or hardened, something of that nature, but obdurate. It's stubbornly refusing to change one opinion or course. Obdura. Obdurate. There we go. Obdurate. I'm that type of person. I gotta know what I'm saying, right? So his obdurate heart. And he utterly refused to advance the smallest portion of the $5,000 I had paid him in order to receive or relieve my sufferings. And yet he was a church member of the considerable standing in Richmond. He even told me that I could get another wife, and so I need not trouble myself about that one. So we look about the value of one another. We look about how the system have trained us to be disposable in one another's eyes, and how, as he's saying, you know, you know, you don't really have any connections to her. You could just get another one because they're replaceable. This also translates into how we relate to one another today. But I told him, those that the God had joined together, let no man put asunder, and that I did not want another wife, but my own, whom I had loved so long. The mentioning of this passage of scripture seemed to give him much offense, for he instantly drove me from his house, saying he did not wish to hear that. So how dare you attempt to, show me up in my holiness? Very interesting. My agony was now complete. She with whom I had traveled the journey of life in change for the space of 12 years. Hold on 1 second.
Call from cell phone SL.
What time is it? Everybody give me one second. Give me 1 second. Let me check the time.
SL.
Babies, pick that phone for me, please.
Hello. Please leave a message after the
All right. Thank you for that. Look in the room. All right. Where are we? It says here. He says, you can read. It says here, let me make sure I took it off of mute. Where am I? The phone rang and everything just, okay, my agony was now complete. She with whom I had traveled the journey of life in chains for the space of 12 years, and the dear little pledges God had given us, I could see plainly must now be separated from me forever, and I must continue desolate and alone to drag my chains through the world. Oh dear, I thought, shall my wife and children no more greet my sight with cheerful looks and happy smiles? For far away in North Carolina swamps are they hence to toil beneath the scorching rays of a hot sun, deprived of a husband and a father's care? Can I endure such an agony? Shall I stay behind while they are thus driven with the tyrant's rod? I must stay. I am a slave. The law of men gives me no power to ameliorate my condition. It shuts up every avenue of hope. But thanks be to God, there is a law of heaven which Senate's laws cannot control. While I was thus musing, I received a message that if I wished to see my wife and children and bid them the last farewell, I could do so by taking my stand on the street where they were all to pass on their way for North Carolina. I quickly availed myself of this information and placed myself by the side of a street, and soon had the melancholy satisfaction of witnessing the approach of a gang of slaves, amounting to 350 in number, marching under the direction of a Methodist minister by whom they were purchased, and amongst which slaves were my wife and children. I stood in the midst of many who, like myself, were mourning the loss of friends and relations, and had come there to obtain one parting look at those whose company they but a short time before had imagined they should always enjoy, but who were, without any regard to their own wills, now driven by the tyrant's voice and the smart of a whip on their way to another scene of toil, and to them another land of sorrow in a far-off southern country. These beings were marched with ropes about their necks and staples on their arms, and although in that respect the scene was no very novel one to me, yet the peculiarity of my own circumstances made it assume that appearance of unusual horror. The train of beings was accomplished by a number of wagons loading with little children of many different families, which as they appeared rent the air with their shrieks and cries and vain endeavors to resist the separation which was thus forced upon them, and the cords which they were thus bound. But what should I now see in the very foremost wagon thus forced upon me? The very foremost wagon, but a little child looking towards me and pitifully calling, "Father, Father." This was my eldest child, and I was obliged to look upon it for the last time, that I should perhaps ever see it again in life. If it had been going to the grave, and this gloomy procession had been about to return its body to the dust from whence it sprang, whence its soul had been taken, its departure from the land of spirits, my grief would have been nothing in comparison to what I then felt. For then I could have reflected that his sufferings were over, and it would never again require nor look for a father's care. But now, and why does he keep, he in his language, I see this disconnect, because he keeps calling his children it and his wife an object. So, this is also a coping mechanism, but let's continue. Hold on one second. Whew. This was my eldest child. You have to wait. Please don't call me again. Please wait. For then I could have reflected. Sorry, that wasn't the story. That was the baby. She whispered, "Mama." Okay. But now it goes with all those tender feelings riven, but which it was endeared to a father's love. It must still live subjected to the deprivation of paternal care and to the chains and wrongs of slavery, and yet be dead to the pleasure of a father from whose heart the impression of its early innocence and love will never be effaced. Thus passed my child from my presence. It was my own child. I loved it with the fondness of a father. But things were so ordered that I could only say farewell and leave it to pass in its chains, while I looked for the approach of another gang in which my wife was also loaded with chains. My eyes soon caught her precious face, but gracious heavens, that glance of agony! My God, spare me forever again enduring. My wife, under the influence of her feelings, jumped aside. I seized hold of her hand while my mind felt unutterable things, and my tongue was only able to say, "We shall meet in heaven." Now he's going to make me cry at this point. I went with her for about 4 miles, hand in hand, but both our hearts were so overpowered with feeling. And I'm sorry, because this is the end of the chapter, and that's good, because I'm gonna have to come back and read. He says, I went with her for about 4 miles, hand in hand, but both our hearts were so overpowered with feelings we could say nothing. And when at last we were obliged to part, the look of mutual love which we exchanged was all the token which we could give each other that we should yet meet in heaven. I mean, all right. I'm gonna just Selah. Sometimes you gotta just, I'm gonna just Selah on that note. This is Henry Box Brown. I know it's been a month and 6 days since we read. We're gonna definitely finish this out. Most I will, and I'm gonna try to do it early tomorrow, and so that we can finish this out and not let us get away from us. That was the 3rd installment of Henry Box Brown. Please bear with me. Like I said, there's so much that has happened. So me stopping through these conversations and just really venting what we're processing. This is very emotionally charged, and it's not something that we can read as a storybook. And so, I encourage those who are listening to also have the conversation as I'm reading it as well on social media, your thoughts. This is our foreparents, this is our history, this is the narratives. So if we need to stop, if we need to process, if we need to, whatever it is that we need to do, this is the space, this is the kind of conversation we're having. And so I want to thank everybody for tuning in at this point. I'm gonna have to pause on that, because that was deep. So until next time, thank everybody for tuning in. My name is Amuna Yisrael. This is the Lev Project, Solonomics 101. So many projects going on. If you missed it, not sure about them, just go ahead and check the reviews or the past episodes. We were doing the whole review on the Roots series. If you missed that, check that out. We did the whole review on the Underground series. If you missed that, check that out. And we also did interesting commentary that just happened this week on Jesse Williams' speech on the BET Awards. So if you missed that as well, check that out. And once again, I'm always honored to hear from everyone and how you're making it along on this journey. As I like right now, you're experiencing it with me as I'm reading these words for the very first time. So please, thank you for bearing with me, and I pray everybody have a blessed day until we meet again. Continue to be the change you want to see in the world. Shalom.